My father doesn't like me. He says I'm a liar. Just like my mother. Only good at pretending to be sick and pitiful to get sympathy. On my 18th birthday, I called him, pleading, please, just this once. Come. If you don't, I might die. His voice was cold. You've even learned how to threaten now? Then go ahead and die. The call ended, and I smiled bitterly. The system's voice echoed in my ears. Mission failed. The host will be terminated. I died on my 18th birthday. In the end, that Mr. Koo, who hated his daughter the most, actually went insane. Chapter 1. I'm a mission executor. Having been brought into Emily's life when she was 6 years old, the system told me that as long as I got my father to spend one birthday with me, the mission would be complete. At first, I thought there couldn't be anything easier. In the mirror, my 6-year-old self had a chubby face and gentle eyes. Whenever I walked by, aunties and grandmothers couldn't resist coming over to hug and kiss me. What an adorable child. Her parents must treasure her. But I soon discovered that wasn't the case. The person who hated me most in the world was my father. Chapter 2. Stephen Koo was forced to marry my mother. At that time, he was the young master of the Koo group, deeply in love with someone else, an actress on the fringes of the entertainment industry. My grandfather was furious. He'd always despised people in show business, and he forced Stephen to break up and return to an arranged marriage. The match was with my mother, Diana. Stephen only intended to go through the motions, to appease my grandfather, but Diana loved Stephen deeply. She had secretly loved him for many years, chasing after him desperately, crying for him, going on hunger strikes, even harming herself. Stephen was overwhelmed by her love. Eventually, Diana became pregnant, and under pressure from both her and his family, Stephen married her. They endured a cold, half-year marriage. 6 months later, Diana died in childbirth. Stephen wasn't there when she died, nor when her funeral was arranged. 3 months later, he returned. The nanny brought me to him. He glanced at me briefly and left a single comment. She looks just like Diana. Chapter 3. Then he turned and left, without a hint of attachment. By the age of 6, I already understood a lot. In art class, when the teacher asked us to draw my family, I drew only myself and the nanny. The teacher asked, "Where's your father?" "Daddy's on TV." "And your mother?" "Mommy's in heaven." The teacher paused, then patted my head and went to the office to call Stephen. "Mr. Koo, next Tuesday is Parent-Teacher Day. Could you come and have a talk?" I overheard and felt a spark of hope. Next Tuesday was also my birthday. If Dad came, it would count as spending my birthday with me. On Tuesday, I started waiting from midday. One class after another passed. And finally, after school, a black Maybach drove into the school gate. I widened my eyes in anticipation, but the one who got out of the car was a sharply dressed assistant. Mr. Koo asked me to give this to the teacher. The assistant handed a gift box and a shopping cart to the teacher. He said, "This child is inherently difficult, probably hard to manage. Sorry for the trouble." The teacher sighed deeply. She wanted to say that wasn't true at all. I was obedient, well-behaved, and diligent in my studies. But the Maybach had already swiftly turned around and left, as if spending even one more second on me was a waste. For the first time, I realized that parental love was either the easiest thing in the world to obtain or the hardest. Chapter 4. I didn't give up trying. At first, I thought that if Dad realized I was actually a good child, he might start liking me. So, I worked hard, becoming an honor student every semester, and my awards covered an entire wall. But it was useless. The nanny sent all this good news to Stephen, but he never replied. Later, some classmates bullied me. They laughed and asked, "You say your dad is Stephen? Liar. Look at her. Does she look like the daughter of the president of Koo Group?" Exactly. No one ever shows up for your parent-teacher meetings. I think you're an orphan. We got into a fight and smashed the glass case by the playground. Glass shattered. And in the chaos, one of the kids picked up a shard and slashed my arm. In the hospital, I heard those kids' parents whispering. I heard she's an illegitimate child. Just pay some money and be done with it. Maybe we should talk to the principal and get her expelled. If she stays and says anything, It could damage our little one's reputation. I sat in the hospital room, expressionless. Protecting their own children is a natural instinct. I didn't blame those parents for wanting to sacrifice me for their kids' future. In fact, I even envied those kids a little. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. Instead, I heard startled voices. Mr. Koo? Stephen had shown up at the last moment. Behind him were his cold, professional assistant, his lawyer, and the principal, who was nodding and bowing. I understand your meaning. This was our school's oversight, the principal said, sweating profusely. We will handle this strictly and expel those responsible. Stephen nodded indifferently. The assistant and lawyer stayed outside to handle the aftermath while he pushed open the door to my hospital room alone. My heart had never felt so warm. In that moment, I thought maybe the ice between Stephen and me was finally melting. Dad, I said, my voice trembling, but the next second, my words caught in my throat, because I saw the way Stephen was looking at me, so cold. Emily, you've grown up, he said flatly. You're playing the same tricks your mother used to. Much later, the nanny told me, back then, Diana had hired 2 people to harass her to gain sympathy. Then called Stephen crying. How much did you pay those classmates to cooperate with your act? Stephen's dark eyes looked at me, full of ruthless scrutiny. I felt all the blood in my body go cold in an instant. I didn't. Emily, don't lie. I really didn't. I cried, unable to prove myself, only feeling wronged. Stephen looked at me in disappointment for a while, then said softly, I thought you might be different from her, but it turns out, you're just like her. He turned and strode away. The principal followed him, unaware of what had just happened in the room, and began praising me to Stephen. So Emily is your daughter. I knew it. She looks so much like you, always coming first in exams. Her essays are beautifully written, quite similar to your writing style back in the day. Stephen's footsteps paused slightly. Then he chuckled softly. What's the use of that? And with that, his footsteps resumed, growing distant. Chapter 5. I grew older year by year. Every year, I tried everything I could to get Stephen to spend my birthday with me. Several times, I almost succeeded, but Stephen never came. He would have his assistant send gifts, each one more expensive than the last, and order a handmade cake worth thousands to be delivered. Perhaps, in front of others, he still wanted to keep up appearances, but he himself never came, not even once. He despised me, thinking I took after Diana, inherently bad. When I was obedient and studious, he thought I was pretending. When I was hospitalized with a high fever, he thought I was faking it for sympathy. No matter what I did, it was wrong. The nanny eventually retired, and I was left alone at home. When I got tired of studying, I would watch TV. On TV, he was with Susan and their son, Cameron, appearing on a family reality show. Susan was his teenage sweetheart. After my grandfather passed away, Stephen finally got to be with her. He poured resources into her career, and the once obscure actress was now a famous one with countless fans. The 3 of them went on a variety show together, a handsome, wealthy father, a beautiful mother, and an adorable son. How wonderful. I was happy for Cameron. He had the happiest family in the world, and Cameron was indeed happy. Despite Stephen's busy schedule, he always found time to help him with homework, build Lego sets, and play basketball. The comments on the screen kept scrolling. Mr. Koo is the best dad in the world. So jealous. I wish I had a dad like that. I smiled and turned off the TV. Tomorrow was my 18th birthday. This was my last chance. If I still couldn't complete the mission, the system would terminate me. I picked up the phone and called Stephen. He didn't answer, no matter how many times I tried. So I had to leave a voicemail. Dad, please. You only come of age once in a lifetime. You've never been there for any of my birthdays. Just this once. Can you spend it with me? Otherwise, I might die. After a long while, a voice message appeared on the screen. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Stephen's voice was cold and mocking. You've even learned to threaten now? Then go ahead and die. Chapter 6. The birthday candles burned out. The flame flickered one last time and went out. I dipped a fork into the frosting on the cake and put it in my mouth. Sweet and fluffy, like a cloud, but all I could taste was bitterness. Host. Time is almost up. The clock's hands were about to strike midnight. On his social media, Steven had just posted a new update, a photo of Cameron smiling on a golf course. The caption was brief but full of affection, spent today with Cameron practicing golf. The little guy's made great progress. Proud of him. I thought for a moment. Took a photo of my birthday cake, and posted my own update. No matter what, I still thank you. Not every parent loves their child, but every child is born loving their parents. I will always love you. Goodbye, Dad. The clock struck 12. Wearing my birthday hat, I quietly took my last breath. My soul floated out, suspended in the air. Outside the window, lights were shining in every home, while inside, my body grew colder in the dark solitude. I asked the system, why can't I leave yet? The electronic voice, low and pleasant, replied, because it's not over yet. As if to confirm the system's words, 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. No one answered. The only one who could open it was lying on the sofa, lifeless. The knocking grew more urgent, louder and louder. Emily. Finally, I heard Steven's voice. Open the door. I know you're home. Chapter 07. I floated in the void, watching Steven. He was dressed in a suit, frowning, ringing the doorbell over and over. When the bell wasn't loud enough, he switched to pounding on the door. I knew it was childish, but in that moment, I couldn't help but hope. Hope that he would open this door, that he would see my body. Would he feel even a tiny bit of regret? Even just a little. But what I hoped for didn't happen. Steven knocked on the door for a long time, then stepped back, his expression growing colder. He picked up his phone, opened my chat, and pressed the voice message button. Emily, is this fun for you? Who was that post for? Me or everyone else? What? You think if playing the victim doesn't work on me, you'll sell the story to the world and have everyone criticize me? Is that your plan? Let me tell you, I feed you and clothe you. I owe you nothing. After sending the voice messages, Steven turned and strode away. He entered the elevator, his brows still furrowed. Perhaps his presence was too intimidating, as the little girl who entered the elevator later stood beside him for a few seconds, then started sobbing. The little girl was wrapped in a blanket in her grandmother's arms, likely sick and needing a late-night visit to the hospital. Steven quickly relaxed his expression. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Uncle's just in a bad mood because of something else. Did I scare you? His voice was so gentle. Watching him, I thought to myself, so this is what my dad is like when comforting a child. Since as long as I could remember, he'd never comforted me. Steven was actually a kind-hearted man. Every year, he anonymously donated to impoverished children in remote areas. His company provided benefits and extra leave for pregnant employees. Even with a stranger's child, he showed the utmost patience and kindness. But when it came to his own daughter, all his tenderness seemed sealed away, leaving only coldness and impatience. In the moment, Steven soon managed to soothe the little girl. He called a car for the girl's grandmother, and while waiting, the little girl, with her fever-reddened face, even started chatting with him. Uncle, do you have kids? Yes. How many? Steven paused for a moment. 2. He said quietly, a son and a daughter. So I was still considered his daughter. The car arrived, and the little girl took a candy from her pocket and put it in Steven's hand. For you, Uncle, she said, smiling brightly. Your daughter must be very lucky. She waved at Steven as her grandmother carried her into the car. The car drove off, and Steven stood there, holding the candy. Your daughter must be very lucky. I saw him take out his phone and open my WeChat moments, scrolling up and down. What are you looking for, Dad? Searching for signs of my happiness? Don't bother, there won't be any. My posts were only visible for the past 3 days, so all he could see was the picture of my birthday cake. No matter what, I still thank you. Not every parent loves their child. Goodbye, Dad. He exited my moments. My chat was empty, with no reply. This wasn't normal. In the past, It was always me messaging him and him ignoring me. It had never been him messaging me and me not replying. Steven hesitated for a moment, then opened the phone app and entered my number. But the next second, his phone rang. The caller was Susan. "Steven, come home quickly. Cameron seems to have a fever." Chapter 8. Steven's car sped all the way home. He walked in, met by Susan's worried face, and immediately asked, "Where's Cameron?" Cameron was lying on the sofa, eyes closed, with a fever patch on his forehead. Steven approached him, the urgency in his eyes undeniable. "Cameron, how are you?" Cameron weakly opened his eyes a sliver. "It hurts." "Where does it hurt?" "My head. It hurts so much." Cameron's voice was weak, but it had an exaggerated theatrical quality, and though he said his head hurt, he was holding his stomach. Steven was silent for 2 seconds, then reached out to feel Cameron's arm and legs, though there was a fever patch on his forehead. Cameron's body wasn't hot at all. "Cameron, are you really sick?" Cameron blinked. "Of course I am." "All right." Steven stood up. "Then I'll take you to the hospital now. If you're sick, you need to rest well. I'll give the tickets for tomorrow night's soccer match to a colleague." "No." Cameron panicked, springing up from the sofa. "You can't give them away." Realizing his mistake, Cameron looked at Steven guiltily, trying to lie back down, but Steven's expression had already turned cold. "Cameron, you can ask Dad for anything, and if I can give it to you, I will. But I don't like children who lie. I've told you this many times." Steven's tone was severe, and tears quickly welled in Cameron's eyes. Susan immediately came over. "Don't be so hard on him, Steven. He's just a kid," she said, holding onto Steven's arm. "I'm the one who told Cameron to pretend to be sick. Blame me if you want." Steven's expression softened. He rubbed his temples and said quietly, "Nonsense." Susan pouted and rubbed her head against his shoulder, then smiled reassuringly at Cameron. "All right, sweetheart. Go back to your room. Mommy needs to talk to Daddy." Seeing that Steven was no longer angry, Cameron's face brightened, and he happily went to his room to watch anime. Susan pulled Steven to sit down. Steven's expression hadn't completely softened. "Why did you have Cameron pretend to be sick?" Susan hesitated. After a moment, she asked haltingly, "Did you go to see that girl?" She didn't say my name. She didn't call me Steven's daughter. She just said that girl. It was her way of drawing a clear line, of implying that I wasn't part of this family. Steven said nothing. Susan's voice was gentle. "I don't mind, but I'm worried about Cameron." "Steven, you're Cameron's father. You know how much Cameron loves you. If Cameron knew that his dad was giving his love to someone else, he'd be heartbroken." There was a long silence. Finally, Steven patted Susan's hand. "Don't worry, that won't happen." Susan let out a long sigh of relief. I watched from the side, strangely feeling no pain. I had been here once before. Back then, I was still in elementary school, and Steven's assistant had come to my school a few times, attending parent-teacher meetings on Steven's behalf. The assistant pitied me, feeling that Steven misunderstood me too deeply, so he found a way to bring me to Steven's house, hoping I could have a meal with them. When I was sent over, Steven hadn't come home yet. Cameron was at his swimming lesson, and only Susan was in the living room. Susan was very friendly. As soon as I entered, she took my hand. "This must be Emmy. You're so beautiful." In that moment, I felt a pang of guilt, because I knew I looked a lot like my mother, Diana. Even Steven hated me for that, let alone Susan, who had once lost him to Diana. But Susan was so kind. She smiled and settled me in the living room, asking what I liked to eat and play with, then brought me all kinds of snacks, comic books, and game consoles. At first, I was shy, but all these new things were irresistible, and soon, I was eating chocolate cookies and reading comics. Half an hour later, Cameron came back. He didn't seem to mind my presence, but when he saw that I was eating his snacks and holding his comic books, he pouted immediately. Before I could say anything, Susan quickly pulled him away. She took Cameron to his room. I hesitated for a moment, then timidly walked over and knocked on the door. "I'm sorry. Susan cut me off, smiling gently at me. It's all right, Emmy. Go read your comics. I need to talk to Cameron for a bit. I had no choice but to return to the living room and pick up the comic book again. But no matter how exciting the story got, I couldn't focus. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, and I could see Susan talking to Cameron, who looked more and more upset, his eyes redder and redder. 10 minutes later, Stephen came home. The moment he walked in, Cameron rushed over and threw himself into Stephen's arms, crying loudly. Stephen was stunned. He picked up Cameron, asking him over and over what was wrong, but Cameron was crying too hard to answer. Susan walked up to Stephen, watching Cameron sob. Her eyes reddened slightly. Stephen turned to ask Susan what had happened. Susan glanced at me hesitantly, then sighed and shook her head without saying anything. Cameron cried for 5 whole minutes. Those were the hardest 5 minutes of my life. I watched as he cried, snot and tears streaming down his face, while Susan wept silently beside him, and Stephen tried to comfort him. I stood there, unable to do anything but watch the second hand tick forward on the giant clock. After 5 minutes, Cameron was exhausted, finally shifting from sobbing to sniffling. "Daddy," he said, clinging to Stephen's neck, smearing snot and tears on his suit. Emmy took my snacks and comics. She wouldn't give them back. I was so scared. I stood there, feeling like I had fallen into an icy abyss. I opened my mouth and said weakly, "I didn't take them. I didn't take them. Aunt Susan gave them to me. I never take things from other kids, no matter how much I want them." In preschool, the teacher even praised me for being the most well-behaved. But I couldn't say any of that, because Stephen, while wiping Cameron's nose with a tissue, shouted at me, "Shut up." I closed my mouth. The injustice I felt grew and grew, and I started to sob quietly. Stephen grew even more impatient. He held Cameron tighter and said to me coldly, "Are tears a weapon? First your mom, now you?" I bit my lip. "Don't cry," I told myself. Cameron's tears would bring him love and sympathy. Your tears would only make them hate you more. Cameron was in Stephen's arms, looking down at me. The crystal chandelier hung above, the light so bright I couldn't see his expression. After a moment, Cameron turned and hugged Stephen's neck. "Daddy," he called softly, "it doesn't matter if Emmy takes my things. As long as no one takes you away, she can have all the chocolate, chips, comics, and games. I just want you." After that, I never went to Stephen's house again. He told the security guards at the gate not to let me in. That overly sympathetic assistant lost his job because of it. From then on, I understood they were a real family, and I would never fit in. Stephen married the woman he'd always loved, had an adorable son, and could have walked into a happy and fulfilling future. But I was this indelible stain on his life, keeping him from severing ties with his painful past. His hatred for me was innate, let alone Susan and Cameron. It had been over 3 hours since my death. Stephen hurriedly washed up, preparing to sleep. He had an important shareholders meeting early the next morning, but the meeting didn't happen. 10 minutes before it was set to begin, his secretary rushed in. "Mr. Koo, there's a call. It's from Emily's teacher." Stephen had just finished 2 cups of coffee and washed his face with cold water, barely managing to shake off his fatigue. At the mention of my name, he immediately lost his temper. "Why are you reporting trivial nonsense now? Is the projector in the conference room set up?" The secretary quickly left, and Stephen adjusted his suit collar in his office. A few minutes later, the secretary returned, seeing Stephen pick up his car keys, informed the executives that the shareholders' meeting is rescheduled for the afternoon. He rubbed his forehead, exhausted. What did the teacher say? Chapter 9. The teacher said that Emily was missing. She hadn't come to class, nor had she called in sick. Her friends had texted and called her, but no one could reach her. Stephen was silent for a few seconds in his office, then sneered, "Is this really worth calling me over for? If I remember correctly, her mother, Diana, was also one of your students back in the day. Didn't Diana do the same thing back then? Every time she was upset, she'd disappear, making everyone frantically look for her, only for us to find out she skipped school to chase after some celebrity." Stephen stood up. "Mr. Lee, next time, Don't bother telling me about such things. I've completely given up on Emily. He reached the door, only to hear a stern voice behind him, Stephen. Stephen turned back and met Mr. Lee's authoritative gaze. Mr. Lee was the most senior teacher at the school, a veteran educator who had served as vice principal years ago but insisted on continuing to teach and be a homeroom teacher. Both Stephen and Diana had once been his students. Diana is Diana, and Emily is Emily. Mr. Lee had always been a gentle teacher, guiding his students with patience and warmth, never raising his voice. But now, he brought out the full authority of an old teacher, and his tone towards Stephen was almost scolding. Stephen had an instinctive respect for Mr. Lee and tried to explain. Emily is Diana's daughter. She resembles Diana so much, you can't deny that. Stephen, do you remember when your mother was imprisoned for financial crimes, and all your classmates made fun of you? Stephen froze. It had been so long. Those painful memories from his youth had long since been buried. But now, Mr. Lee ripped them open, exposing the old wounds. I held a class meeting and gave those bullying students a stern warning. I told them that parents and children are separate individuals, and the mistakes of parents should not be borne by their children. Back then, you cried and thanked me, saying that my words had saved you. Now, 30 years later, as a parent yourself, have you forgotten all of that? Stephen stood there, unable to speak for a long time. Emily and Diana are not the same. They are completely different individuals. Emily is one of my best students. She is hardworking, disciplined, diligent, and never complains when wronged. She always helps her classmates when they need it. Mr. Lee spoke firmly. I am telling you this after almost 40 years of teaching. She is a truly good child. If souls could shed tears, I would be crying at this moment. But I couldn't. So, all that passed through me was a gust of wind, half cold, half burning. I saw Stephen's hand, hanging by his side, begin to tremble. He rarely lost control like this. Stephen. Mr. Lee's voice softened. Emmy has never missed a class without notifying us. This is extremely unusual. She may be facing an insurmountable problem. At times like these, the help of outsiders is limited. I hope that, as her only family, you can be there for her. Chapter 10. The car was nearing its speed limit, but Stephen kept pressing down on the gas. The rearview mirror reflected his bloodshot eyes, and the GPS navigation's voice announced, "Your destination is ahead." He was rushing to my home. My soul sat quietly in the back seat, watching him. The system hadn't left. Its electronic voice echoed in my ear, "Host, he's coming to find you. Do you feel happy now?" I thought about it seriously, then shook my head. It's too late. I realized that, in the moment before I died, I did harbor resentment, hoping to see Stephen regret it. But now I only felt, what was the point? A WeChat message appeared on the phone screen. It was from Stephen. "Emmy, today Dad will make up your birthday." But my birthday had already passed. Everything in the past was truly gone. Stephen stopped multiple times on his way to my house. He wanted to buy me some gifts, along with a birthday cake. Although I had received many gifts yesterday, those were bought by his assistant using Stephen's black card. Stephen himself hadn't put in any effort for my birthday. He hadn't even said happy birthday. Now, he desperately wanted to make up for it. Stephen entered cake shops and gift stores, but each time he entered, he was filled with new confusion. He didn't know what I liked. Cameron liked chocolate, tiramisu, raspberry sauce, one-piece figurines, and signature basketball shoes. But Stephen didn't know what Emily liked. Not at all. In the end, Stephen picked out a strawberry-flavored cake, because he vaguely remembered that I seemed to like pink. When I first started first grade, the nanny had taken me to a mall, where we ran into Stephen carrying Cameron. Stephen was buying toys for Cameron, needing 3 assistants to carry everything. Then, perhaps because I looked so pitiful standing by, Stephen handed Cameron to an assistant, took my hand, and led me to the counter, asking me what I liked. It was the first time Stephen had held my hand. The warmth of a father's touch was so precious. I was both excited and nervous, stammering as I looked at the shelves of toys. I was afraid that if I spent too much, the little bit of affection I'd managed to get would vanish. So, in the end, I only picked a doll. Just this? Stephen asked. Yes. I nodded. Her dress is pink. I like pink. Now, holding a pink cake and a pile of other gifts, Stephen entered the elevator. Even if she didn't like the rest, Emily should like this pink cake. With that thought in mind, Stephen stepped out of the elevator. He was greeted by a crowd of onlookers and the police. The police noticed Stephen and approached him. What is your relation to the resident of Unit 1802? Stephen froze. What is your relation to the resident of Unit 1802? The officer repeated. I'm her father. Stephen's lips moved, and it took a long time for him to say the words. Officer, what happened? Did my daughter do something wrong? Did she? Stephen didn't continue, because the officer's tone turned somber. All right. Please cooperate with us to confirm the identity of the deceased. Chapter 11. It was the nanny who called the police. Although she had already retired, she had taken care of me for many years, and her affection for me had never faded. This time, she came by high-speed train to take care of her daughter during her confinement. And since it happened to be my birthday, she decided to visit me. She knocked on the door for a long time without getting any response. By chance, the landlord was showing the place to prospective tenants and opened the door. In the morgue, Stephen looked at my body. Is this your daughter? He was silent for a long time before he nodded. Preliminary examination suggests a sudden cardiac arrest. So far, we have ruled out foul play. Stephen couldn't hear what the officer said after that. Ruled out foul play. No, it wasn't true. He knew who killed his daughter. Dad, please celebrate my birthday with me just once. If you don't come, I will die. The sound of my crying still echoed in his ears. Although he didn't understand how it worked, Stephen remembered what Teacher Lee had said. Emmy was never one to lie. So, the person who killed Emily was her father. Emmy was never one to lie. Every time she asked for help, it was real. Every time she worked hard at her studies, trying to earn his praise. Every time she was sick and in pain, hoping he'd visit her. It was all real. But he had been so fixated on his hatred for her mother that he wrote off all of those things as lies. The police watched as Stephen left. The president of the coup group had no expression on his face. His eyes were vacant, and there wasn't the slightest hint of tears. So heartless. One of the officers thought. The rumors must be true. He really hated his daughter, not even a single tear shed for her. Stephen stepped outside. Sunlight pouring down on him. He took out his phone and opened our chat. He scrolled up, reading every message I had sent him. A cat I met on the way to school. My good grades in the midterm exams. A classmate who was sick. And the charity fundraiser I organized for them. Seeing Dad on the cover of a business magazine today. And buying many copies to bring home. Dad, can you come to the parent-teacher meeting? It's okay if you can't. I know your work is important. You should focus on that. Message by message. Finally, he stopped at his own reply. The last message he had ever sent me. Then just go die. At 3 in the afternoon. The sun was blinding and cruel. That day, many passers-by saw a man in a suit, crouched at the entrance of the police station, crying until his voice broke. Chapter 12. Stephen came home late that night. As soon as he walked in, Susan approached him. Why are you home so late? I called you so many times, but you didn't pick up. Did you go see that girl again? Her tone carried an unmistakable displeasure. Just yesterday, she had pressured Stephen to reduce contact with Diana's child, to avoid hurting Cameron's feelings. And now today, Stephen was late again. Don't try to lie to me. I called the office, and they said you skipped the board meeting. You went to that girl's school. Susan frowned. Stephen, whether it's skipping school or getting into early relationships, that girl isn't worth your time. She's ruining her own life. Cameron is still young. He needs his father's reassurance. She's dead. Stephen suddenly spoke. His cold voice cut through Susan's incessant chatter. Susan was stunned. Emily is dead. A sudden cardiac arrest. Stephen looked at Susan. His expression was wooden, his throat visibly choked. Susan took a moment to react, then slowly covered her mouth with her manicured hands. Oh my God, this is really... She blinked and tried hard to squeeze out 2 tears. How could this happen? Stephen looked at her quietly. In truth, Susan wasn't an actress known for her talent, her acting could be described as subpar. If Stephen hadn't invested heavily in her projects, she would have struggled to become famous. And now, even as her tears rolled down her cheeks, they only felt fake. Stephen suddenly felt very, very tired. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to sleep." But Susan grabbed him. There was a hint of panic in her eyes. The living cannot compete with the dead. If that daughter had continued to live, Stephen probably wouldn't have treated her any differently. But now that she was gone, so young, his guilt would only grow, and that would be detrimental to Cameron. "Stephen, don't be too hard on yourself. You were always good to her. She died of heart disease, right? I remember Diana had heart problems too. Maybe it runs in the family. Or maybe, could it be karma? Diana did a lot of wrong back then, tearing us apart. Maybe this is her retribution, passing on to her daughter." Susan was usually quite calculating, but at this moment, she was too anxious. Before she could finish, Stephen turned to her abruptly. His gaze was as cold as ice. "Susan," he spoke in a low voice. Her name was Emily. Susan froze under his dark, piercing eyes, unable to move. "You never even called her by her name. You kept saying she was Diana's daughter, reminding me again and again, banking on my hatred for Diana, didn't you?" Stephen had almost never shown Susan the cold, ruthless side of himself. She was completely terrified. Without saying anything further, Stephen left her standing there and headed towards the door. "Stephen," before Cameron went to sleep, he said he hopes you can take him to play basketball tomorrow. Susan made one last desperate plea. The only answer she got was the loud slam of the door. Chapter 13. Stephen arrived at my apartment. He had come to help pack up my belongings. If it weren't for the fact that my spirit couldn't stop him, I really wouldn't want him going through my things. But there was nothing I could do. Stephen was my biological father. The law said our blood bond couldn't be broken. It said that, even in death, we were connected. He found many things I never wanted him to see, like my diagnosis of depression. I had been receiving psychological treatment since middle school. It started off mild, but got worse and worse over time. In fact, the school counselor had once called Stephen. She told him that Emily showed signs of severe depression and urged him to take me to a public hospital for further evaluation. Stephen had been overseas at the time, meeting an important client. After listening for a few minutes, he hung up on the counselor. How could Emily have depression? She was well-fed and well-clothed, attending the best school in the city. It wasn't like she was being abused. She was just like Diana, overly dramatic and always seeking attention. Later, Stephen sent his assistant to attend the parent-teacher meeting on his behalf. He asked around, and all of my classmates said I was cheerful and outgoing. Not only did I never show sadness, I was the first to comfort others when they were down. This only confirmed for Stephen that my depression was just a ruse. But now, faced with pages and pages of therapy records, his hands were trembling. The same word kept appearing in all those long conversations. Dad. From the first page to the last. It was the only consistent term. "Doctor, you're so smart. Can you help me figure out what I did wrong to make Dad hate me so much?" This was Emily, just starting middle school. During her first visit to the counseling office, "The cuts on my wrist are from a ruler. Yes, not a knife. I still want to live." Okay. But recently, I've had these thoughts that someone like me, who no one likes, wouldn't be missed if I died. This was Emily, in her first year of high school. Research suggests that during adolescence, self-identity formation relies heavily on parental influence. In other words, a child hated by their parents may come to believe they are inherently worthless, and in turn, start to hate themselves. Stephen's fingers shook as he turned to the last page. The final entry was from my senior year of high school, a week before my birthday. "I've been taking my meds regularly. Don't worry, I've always followed the doctor's orders, but it seems like ever since I started, I can't feel sadness, but I also can't feel joy. It's so awful. I had a dream about Dad taking me to an amusement park. It was such a good dream, and I thought I'd be happy. But maybe because of the meds, I realized I couldn't feel any happiness at all. What a waste of a good dream. Did Dad ever take me to an amusement park? Aw, I'll answer that next time, haha. Stephen put down the therapy records. He was silent for a long time before he turned off the lights. Letting the darkness envelop him completely, he sat there in the darkness, tears dripping onto the records. Eventually, he covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably. Of course not. Of course he had never taken me to an amusement park. But on WeChat, I had seen pictures of him taking Cameron to Disneyland. They posted a 9-photo grid, each picture filled with bright sunshine, father and son smiling, surrounded by Winnie the Pooh, Mickey Mouse, and Snow White. Fireworks lit up the night sky. It was the happiest place in the world. And I, even until my death, had never been to Disneyland. Stephen finished packing my belongings. There wasn't much. The closet seemed big, but it was mostly empty. 4 school uniforms, 2 for winter, 2 for summer, 1 down jacket, a few sports t-shirts and pants, socks rolled into small balls, neatly arranged, no dresses, no hairpins. It was clear the owner of this wardrobe wasn't into dressing up. Indeed, a girl who loathed herself could never appreciate her own beauty. Finally, Stephen found a doll at the bottom of the wardrobe, a doll in a pink dress. The light pink, ruffled dress was old, with faded edges, but it was clean. The hair was neatly combed, soft and pretty. It was the only gift Emily had ever received from her father in her 18 years of life. She had treasured it, keeping it from elementary school to middle school to high school, from the dorm to home, always bringing it with her. Stephen held the doll tightly. Suddenly, he remembered the first time he saw Emily. She was only 3 months old, barely bigger than this doll. She looked at him with innocent eyes, just beginning to understand the world, and he had turned away coldly, not even giving her a hug. Now, all he wanted was to give his daughter a hug, but in his arms, there was only a cold doll. Chapter 14. Susan noticed that Stephen was starting to act strangely. She often woke up in the middle of the night to find Stephen sitting motionless beside her, staring out the window. I dreamed of Emmy, he murmured. I dreamed that I took her to an amusement park. During board meetings, he started to drift off frequently, and the executives began to protest, claiming that Stephen was no longer fit to continue as CEO. So he stepped down. Susan was anxious. She knew that asking too directly would provoke Stephen's resentment. But with his silence, she had to ask how he planned to distribute his shares and assets. Stephen replied calmly, "Donate it all in Emmy's name." That was when Susan found out that Stephen had set up a fund named Emily. This charity fund was dedicated to helping all children in need, whether they were struggling financially and unable to continue their education, suffering from a toxic home environment, or victims of abuse or bullying. The fund employed professionals from various fields to provide the children with the help they needed. Susan's worst fear had come true. Emily was dead, and the things Stephen hadn't given her in life. He now felt that no amount could be enough after her death. Out of desperation, Susan wrote a tearful post online, trying to use public opinion to remind Stephen that he had a wife and a son. Lavishing most of his wealth on a deceased person was such a disregard for his family. However, Susan didn't expect that within just a few days of her post, people would dig up all the past dirt. The narrative did not go her way, quite the opposite. In fact, MS. Lou keeps calling Diana a homewrecker. But why do I feel like you're the real third party? No matter what tricks Diana pulled, Mr. Koo must have been willing, right? Who else is to blame for the child being born, regardless of who came first? Diana and Stephen had a marriage license, didn't they? That makes them a legally married couple. If I remember correctly, right after Diana died, her body barely cold, Mr. Koo announced he was back together with Ms. Lou. Those who loved gossip back then may have aged out of it. But we didn't forget. Agreeing with the above, Susan has always been the other woman, hasn't she? After Stephen married Diana, didn't she also have a scandal with some foreign tycoon? She only returned home because the tycoon's wife was too formidable. Honestly, Mr. Koo should get a paternity test. That son might not even be his. And so, Susan's career in entertainment came to an end, with more and more dirt being unearthed. She faced total disgrace. Stephen never returned home. In truth, if Susan and Cameron had lived frugally, The assets Stephen left behind would have allowed them to continue living comfortably for a long time. But Susan couldn't accept this outcome. She poured large sums into investments recommended by friends, only to lose it all. So she convinced herself that it must be Emily's restless spirit, messing with the family's feng shui. And she hired one master after another to exorcise me. The masters all had their own methods, but the one thing they had in common was that they accepted large payments. None of it worked. I watched my translucent soul, realizing that I still couldn't leave this world. Perhaps the master spells and my system just operated on entirely different wavelengths. Susan cried every day, telling Cameron, "Everything I do is for you." Cameron's voice was icy. "Oh, please, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this mess." Susan was stunned. She had worked so hard to secure a future for her son, never imagining that one day she would hear such hatred in his voice. Cameron truly hated Susan. Of course, he also hated Stephen. This boy, spoiled all his life, believed that everything his parents provided him was his by right. "Give me money," he demanded, holding out his hand to Susan. Susan wept, saying, "We have no money left." Cameron grew impatient. He kicked Susan in the stomach and rummaged through the wardrobe for the last 2 rings, then took them to be pawned. He used the money to visit the most hidden part of a nightclub. What joy! Only in this brief stupor could he escape his problems and return to his former fantasy life. I floated through the nightclub, studying the worm that had grown from the honey jar of indulgence. As the strobe lights intermittently lit up the space, Cameron drank heavily, eventually passing out on the couch, the last of his money already squandered. In fact, alcohol couldn't have cost that much. There were old needle marks on his arm. The latest one was on his neck. That night, the police raided the nightclub, arresting everyone except for Cameron. By the time they found him, he was lying on the couch, his nose and mouth blocked by vomit, no longer breathing. Chapter 15. Stephen didn't know about his son's death. His phone had been off for a long time. He was in the mountains, fasting and meditating, perhaps seeking inner peace. He offered incense and prayed before Buddha. He prayed that in the next life, I could be his daughter again, and he would make it up to me. The system seemed touched. It looked at Stephen's gaunt face and earnest prayers and said, "Your father truly regrets what he did. In the next life, would you want to be his daughter again?" I smiled and said, "No way." But the system tried its best. You know how stories like these go, families, no matter how chaotic things get, always end with reconciliation. Everyone sits down together for a joyful reunion dinner. That's the standard ending for all family dramas. I don't particularly want to criticize such an ending, on the contrary. I understand it. People say they want to cut ties with their families. But in reality, perhaps only 1 in 10,000 can truly do so. The desire for love is a fundamental human trait, especially for teenagers who haven't yet stepped into the wider world. To a child, parents are everything. To bring about this happy ending, the system gave Stephen a dream. In the dream, Stephen heard a low, electronic voice. It explained everything, why my death was inevitable if he didn't come to celebrate my birthday. For the first time in years, Stephen wept uncontrollably in his sleep. "It really was me who killed her. Your daughter does not blame you," the electronic voice said. "Would you like to see her one last time?" Chapter 16. The news of the Coup Group CEO's suicide made headlines. Stephen had leaped from the cliffs of Yunshan. The once mighty CEO spent his final days in a small storeroom at a mountain monastery, without any family or friends by his side, living in extreme simplicity. The only decoration was a doll in a pink dress. Chapter 17. I saw Stephen's soul. He was walking towards me. His arms were open, tears streaming down his face. "Emmy, it's Dad." Throughout my long life, I had dreamed of this scene countless times. In my dreams, I would run towards that embrace, feeling safe, thinking to myself, how wonderful it is to be a child loved by her father. But when I woke up, all I had was my phone, empty, without a single reply. So I took a step back and turned away. I heard Stephen ask the system, his voice desperate, "Why can't I catch up to Emmy?" The system was silent for a long time before finally answering him. "Because your daughter doesn't want you to catch up. She has grown up now. And if she doesn't want to, you can never hold her back again. I smiled. So that's it. I ran forward, faster and faster. No looking back. No reconciliation. If I kept running ahead, I would eventually meet people who truly loved me. The world ahead grew wider and wider. Finally, a bright white light engulfed me, and I saw my form finally fade into transparency. Goodbye, Stephen. Goodbye, Emily. Chapter 18. Later, Stephen saw Emily once more. He begged the system to let him see how Emily was doing. The system agreed, but the cost was that Stephen's soul would dissipate entirely. Stephen agreed, and so, he really did see Emmy in the new world. She had her hair in pigtails, wearing overalls, eating a milk ice cream bar. The moment she saw him, she cried out in surprise. "Daddy!" She ran towards him. Tears welled in Stephen's eyes, and he opened his arms. He had never felt so excited. He was finally going to hold his daughter. But in the next moment, Emmy ran right through him. She ran into the arms of the man behind him, who lifted her up with a smile. He was a tall, burly man, wearing a chef's uniform, his face covered in grease and sweat. But Emmy didn't mind at all. She happily smeared ice cream on his face, giving him a mustache. "Daddy's a big kitty now." The man chuckled and lifted Emmy onto his shoulders. "All right, let's go home. What does Emmy want to eat? Daddy will cook it." Stephen stood there, stunned, and followed them home. It was a very small house, deep in an alleyway. The kitchen didn't even have a range hood. The air was thick with the scent of cooking. But Emmy sat on a small stool, doing her homework, her smile so bright. Stephen had never seen such an expression on her face in all her previous life. "I have good news, Emmy. Daddy got promoted to head chef, and my salary increased by 1,500 yuan. Summer break is next week. How about Daddy takes you to Disneyland?" Emmy cheered in excitement. "But that's not all, Tata. Look what I have." Stephen watched as the man pulled out a gift like a magician, holding it up for Emmy, a doll in a pink dress. Emmy was overjoyed. She took the doll and rushed into her bedroom. There was a cheap wooden cabinet there, and Emmy opened the door. Stephen froze. Inside were many dolls. Some wore red dresses, some white, others in biker gear with sunglasses. So she didn't just like pink. He realized then that he had never really known her. That was Stephen's final thought. In the next moment, a gust of wind blew, and his soul scattered into the chilly northern breeze. Emmy seemed to sense that someone was watching her. She turned around, but the room was empty. Whoever it was must have left. She shook her head and carefully brushed the hair of the doll in the pink dress before placing it among the other dolls. In her future life, she would receive many, many more gifts.